Hey, there it's me Eden. If you are new to the channel then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access. Link in the comment, thanks. To add to all of this, a couple of people were coming down the street towards us. The game was up. People were bound to realize I was a boy as soon as they saw me. My concern must have been obvious on my face, because Anita turned to me and whispered, "Relax, and try and smile." "Yes," agreed Nikki. Girls always smile, remember. Smiling was the last thing on my mind, but I did my best to look relatively cheerful as the old couple approached. Linked as we were going to force them off the pavement if we weren't careful. Anita anticipated this, however, and unlinked herself from me while they were still several steps away. They smiled in appreciation and walked on by. I heaved a sigh of relief. "See, that wasn't difficult, was it?" asked Anita. "They just thought we were 3 girls out for a walk." "Yes," agreed Nikki. Anita linked arms with me and we walked on towards the high street. A middle-aged man carrying armloads of shopping passed us, and again smiled. We turned a corner, and at the end of the street in front of us, forming a T-junction, was the dreaded high street itself. Although it was about 200 yards in front, I could see the shops across the junction, and crowds of people crossing the road. I bit my lip and breathed in and immediately regretted the action, as my bra held my ribs firm against their attempted expansion. A couple of young boys, around 12, were running from behind us. This really worried me. Why were they running? Had they realized I was a boy, and were coming to confront me about it? Anita and Nikki did not seem to share my concern, and the boys ran into the road to get past us. Taking up the whole pavement, one grumbled as he went past. "Nice tits though," said the other, as they ran on towards the high street. I was shocked, and stared at Anita. They were right, her tits were nice, I thought. "They liked your tits," she said, and giggled. "No, yours." I insisted. "I don't think so," put in Anita, grinning widely. "It was you they were looking at." "Yeah," agreed Nikki. We walked on along the road, and neared the junction that was the high street, with all its crowds. I felt naked and vulnerable, and tried to slow the others down. "Come on, Sarah," encouraged Nikki. "Nearly there." "I know," I replied miserably. If I'd have known we were going somewhere so public, I would never have agreed to come out dressed like this. "It's good for you, you know it is," Anita said, encouragingly. "This is the best practice you could possibly have for the contest." "Yeah," agreed Nikki. Still trying to drag my feet, I was more or less carried the last 20 yards or so to the junction. Then there it was, the high street. I blinked at the sudden change of pace. It was just a normal small town high street, with a mix of shops and offices, all in red brick. People were swarming along the narrow pavements, somehow not bumping into each other, and, despite my fears, showed no particular interest in me. Opposite us was a greengrocer's shop, with much of its wares on display outside the shop. Cars and buses rumbled slowly along the narrow street, stopped every 10 yards or so by pedestrian crossings, or traffic lights, or just the general volume of traffic. "Where do we need to go?" asked Anita. "Well, I've got to get some food and stuff," Nikki replied. "But that can wait if you want." "Why don't we have some coffee? That might be fun." "Oh yes," responded Anita enthusiastically. "We can drop in at the cafe." "That'd be good." I was speechless. I had hoped we could get this high street trip over as quickly as possible. The last thing I wanted was to drag it out with cups of coffee, or window shopping. "I don't feel like a coffee," I mumbled. "Well, you can have a milkshake then." Anita announced, and taking my arm again, led me firmly up the high street in the direction of the only cafe there. I felt dejected and miserable. People shuffled past us in the street, and I stared at each of them, gritting my teeth and awaiting recognition. None came, however, and the people we passed seemed entirely content to ignore us to the same extent that Nikki and Anita were ignoring them. At last we came to the cafe, which was a relatively downmarket affair. The outside was painted white, with big plate windows filled here and there with posters, poorly drawn and worded, showing the offerings. I glanced in through the windows. There were around 10 tables set out regularly. 3 or 4 were occupied, mainly by elderly ladies resting their feet after an arduous morning's shopping. Anita went in first, up the 2 red painted steps to the door, which she opened. Nikki motioned me to follow, which I reluctantly did, wondering if I would be able to keep my footing in the boots. I managed it and entered the cafe, to be hit with the smells of fried food and coffee in equal measure. I flinched, waiting for the customers to recognize me as a boy wearing a skirt, but there was no lull in the conversations. I heaved a sigh of relief. "What do you want, Sarah?" Anita asked. It took me a moment to realize she was talking to me. "A milkshake," I mumbled as quietly as I could. "What flavor?" "Banana," I replied. Nikki told Anita she wanted a coffee, and, touching my arm, pointed to an empty table at the back of the room. I had to lead the way, and did so gingerly, picking my way past the other tables. It was then that I noticed 2 biker lads, clad in leather jackets at a table in the other corner. They were lounging in their chairs, and staring expressionlessly at Nikki and me as we walked through. I turned my eyes away from them quickly, but was still excruciatingly aware of their eyes burning into me. I was sure that I had been discovered. When we got to the table, I managed to make for the only chair, which would mean I wasn't looking at them. I sat down quickly, and Nikki walked around the table to sit opposite me. "Watch how you're sitting, Sarah," she whispered urgently to me. I shook my head to indicate I didn't know what she meant. "Knickers," she whispered. In shame, I pulled my skirt down as far as it would go. Would this torture ever end? I could not see how girls put up with this sort of hassle in their everyday lives all the time. There was so much to remember. "That's better," Nikki told me. "Now remember, smile a lot." I grinned wanly in response, and looked out of the grubby window. "I've seen a smashing top in Sylvias Boutique," Nikki said, conversationally. I stared at her. What was I supposed to respond to that? "It's blue," she went on. "Have you seen it?" "It's in the window." I was only vaguely aware of the existence of the shop she was talking about, and certainly wasn't an avid follower of its window display. I shook my head. "They have some good stuff in from time to time," Nikki went on. "Especially around now. We ought to have a look in there." "No," I responded, rather quickly and aggressively. The elderly couple at the table next to us looked around. I was saved by the imminent arrival of Anita, carrying a tray with 2 coffees and my milkshake on it. I looked up to watch her swivel through the tables. The biker lads watched her too, and I felt a pang of jealousy, as well as relief that they were no longer looking at me. "Here we go," she said brightly. 2 coffees and a milkshake. She placed the plastic tray onto the table, and sat down next to Nikki and opposite me. "Well, this is good," she announced. "Yes," agreed Nikki. "I was just saying to Sarah that we ought to look in at Sylvias Boutique while we're here." "Oh yes," responded Anita with some enthusiasm. "That would be good." "No," I whispered. "I can't do that." "Of course you can," Anita told me brightly. "It'll be good." "Yeah," replied Nikki. Then suddenly, looking behind me, she said, "Oh, look out." I turned, and to my horror one of the biker lads was standing behind me. I froze in terror. He must have realized that I was a boy, and was coming over to sort me out. "Hello girls," he drawled.
"Goodbye,"
replied Anita dismissively. He stood there, unabashed by this put down. "I was wondering if any of you wanted a quick ride on my bike." "No thanks," Anita replied. "Now we're very busy, so you go off and play on your own." He smirked back, but did not budge. "It's a 250, he went on. "You'll have a good time." "We're having a good time already," Nikki informed him and turned pointedly to Anita, and started a conversation about Sylvias Boutique. "As it happens," he went on, putting his hand on my shoulder, "I was talking to Cinderella here, not the ugly sisters." I jerked in fear as his hand touched my shoulder, and Anita and Nikki gasped in outrage at his comments. I hardly heard their barrage of abuse at him, but after a few seconds his hand was removed, and he returned to his friend. "Bloody lesbians, that's what they are," he declared. "Still, that one's got nice tits," he continued, pointing at me. The elderly couple next to us tooted their displeasure at this behavior, but to my relief, he and his friend stomped out of the cafe and out into the street. "What a cheek," I managed to say eventually. "Ugly sisters." He was hardly an oil painting himself. "Don't worry about it," said Anita assuringly. "He was just picking on you because you were so quiet."
"Yeah,"
agreed Nikki. "You've got to give as good as you get in this game." "That's right." "But he called you ugly sisters." "That's outrageous." I went on, still shocked at what had happened. Anita just shrugged. "Well, if we go downtown with someone as pretty as you, it's bound to happen." She and Nikki giggled at this. It took me some time to regain any composure, during which time Anita and Nikki carried on talking about the merits and otherwise of Sylvias Boutique. I took a sip of my milkshake and tried to pay attention to what they were saying. "I could never wear anything like that with my legs though," Anita said. "Sarah could get away with it, but I never could." "No," said Nikki. "Me neither." "Still, we might as well have a look in there."
"Yeah,"
agreed Anita. "You don't mind really, do you, Sarah?" I looked at her. "Well, I suppose not. As long as we don't stay too long, or have to try anything on." "Well, it depends what they've got in," Anita responded. "I can't say I won't try anything on whatever happens." "No," agreed Nikki. I took another sip of the milkshake, feeling a little calmer now the bikers had gone. The strong banana flavor took away some of the sweet plastic taste of my lipstick, which was something of a relief. I leant my head on my hand on the table, and fell into something of a dream state, while Anita and Nikki chatted on. I thought about my predicament. Here I was, sharing a coffee with the girl of my dreams, but wearing a whole load of clothes I wasn't used to. Why had I said yes, when they had asked me to enter the competition? To be near to Anita, I supposed. But why had I agreed to all this practicing stuff they had suggested? That I couldn't answer, except by realizing that I could not say no to Anita when she asked me for something. I was a little less uncomfortable now I was sitting down, but my feet and legs still ached from the boots. The tights were really becoming a nuisance as well, feeling clammy and clingy all over my legs and midriff. I surprised myself by realizing, much as Anita had promised, that I was getting used to the feel of wearing a bra. I had moderated my breathing somewhat, to make sure it didn't suddenly grab me around the chest. Hanging the shoulder bag on the arm of the chair had been a relief as well. I looked over to Anita, chatting happily away to Nikki. How I loved her, despite my current humiliation. My mind suddenly jumped when I remembered that I had agreed to sleep over at her house as well. Did that mean that something magical might happen, even with me dressed like this? My mind went around in circles like this for some time. It was something of a surprise then, when Anita suddenly said, "Come on, Sarah. Finish your milkshake, and we'll get on." She and Nikki had stood up, ready to go. I sipped the last of my milkshake, and stood up as well. We negotiated the tables to get to the door, and then down the steps back into the street. Thwabu went my skirt, as it clung to my thighs. Smaller steps, I told myself, take smaller steps like a girl. Right, let's have a look then, said Nikki, walking further up the high street to where I knew Sylvia's boutique was. Anita took my arm, and we followed Nikki up the pavement, dodging passers-by as we did so. I got a couple of glances, but nothing that made me think my cover was blown. Some 30 yards or so further up the road we came to Sylvia's boutique. Its windows were slightly shaded, and full of mannequins wearing rather racy fashions. One had on a skirt rather similar to mine, only a little flouncier, and she was wearing white tights as against my black. Nikki paused briefly to look in the window. "That's the top I was on about," she said. "The blue one." "It's nice," said Anita. "Let's go in and see whether they've got your size." Nikki walked across to the door and walked in. Anita and I followed. Inside, against 3 walls, were racks upon racks of girls' clothes. The till was about 3/4 of the way down one side, and behind that, brightly lit, was the underwear section. I was struck by the smell of new clothes that seemed to pervade the whole shop. Please subscribe for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.